So we all feel broken, disenchanted, longing to recover our language and virtue and hope. And we think that we can do it through story, but we have yet to fully philosophize this. And tonight on the Mosaic Ark, we have a very special guest who has theorized at a level that I'm sure you all are going to absolutely enjoy why it is that Tolkien is able to help us so effectively recover from the depredations of the machine. And if that's not enough to get you enchanted, welcome to the Mosaic Ark. Welcome to the Mosaic Ark. We are so happy to have you on with us. This is my new friend, Robert Dobie, who did me the very great honor of sending me a book, which he actually quoted me in. And this, you guys, if you want to know how to get on the Mosaic Ark, cite me in your bibliography. No, so Robert, thank you so much for joining us. This
Well,
was
thank you for having me. This is wonderful. I'm really, and it's a great honor to, because I've known and followed you through many years. So it's wonderful to actually be, to talk to you. If not face to face, at least, camera to camera, which is great.
Well, this is how we're going to end up blushing, right? Before we even get started. No, so this was, I'll say, this is my way of mea culpa that Robert sent me his book, and I was on leave last year, and I didn't pick it up until this spring. And at which point I realized, oh my goodness, I'd had this treasure sitting in my inbox on campus all the time that I was off writing about Franciscans, right? And now, Robert, you say you're on leave writing about
Right,
something else that sounds actually really cool and that we need to talk to you about. But tonight we want to hear about the fantasy of J.R.R. Tolkien,
right.
Mythopoeia and the recovery of creation. You guys, you've got you. We sell books here. You guys got to go buy this book, and we're gonna help you get into it. And so thank you and welcome. You say
Excellent.
you say you knew me already.
Yeah. I've known of your work. I mean, and the art of prayer, which
Oh,
is an incredibly impressive piece of scholarship, and approaching, the breviary and the little office, through the medieval mindset. Of course, this recapturing the mentality of medieval men and women as they prayed was to me just absolutely fascinating. But even further back, I remember, I think it was at Kalamazoo in
mm.
2012. I think you gave a talk on Tolkien there. I think it
I
was
think,
in
well, I did give a
2012.
talk on, I've only given one once, so it must have been this one when it was a panel on teaching Tolkien.
Yeah, I think so. I think
Yes.
it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And you teach a course on Tolkien. You say this in your book that the book comes out of a class that you've been teaching, and it sounded from what you said about the class about as long as I've been doing mine, right?
Hmm.
For some
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you
Yeah.
do it every year, every other year? How is this come into your
Y-
schedule?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, one of the great I mean, one of the really nice things about this book, unlike, articles and other things that I've written before, which kind of stemmed out of kind of more specialized research. I mean, I have a PhD in philosophy with a concentration in medieval philosophy. I've done work on mostly on Meister Eckhart, some Islamic philosophy, Sufism, and so forth, and Thomas Aquinas. But really, of course, Tolkien was more of like a passion, a side passion of mine. And so, and I talk about this a little bit in the preface of my book, how, um, it was, of course, I read Tolkien as well, started reading The Lord of the Rings when I was 12 years old.
This is like
Um,
the formation story of medievalists. I read Tolkien when I was I was 11, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was 12. I remember I picked it up. I didn't even start with The Hobbit. I started with the Fellowship of the Ring, and I had a really good friend in grade school who was really into. He was really into Tolkien, and he was talking about it. They even named their family dog Gandalf. I remember
Is
Mhm.
Gandalf a dog name? I
this.
mean,
I don't know. He was this wonderful black Labrador.
okay,
Uh,
yeah, that works.
I was thinking he should be at Great Giant White Pyrenees, you know?
Okay, yes.
Gandalf the White.
He was no,
Dog names
and
from Tolkien
and
characters.
he was this black Labrador. He was a very, very sweet dog, actually, a wonderful dog. And but anyway, I was like, oh, I gotta get up to speed on this, And what's really
When you're
interesting, I mean,
12, this is important. I'm impressed you had a friend who was reading it. I mean, I don't think I met
yeah, yeah,
anybody who had read Tolkien for
he
ages.
was a really, I mean, he was a really smart, he was a really smart guy. Um, he was really, he eventually, he went to MIT. He was just, just a really, really,
This is a good
bright guy.
pedigree. Read Tolkien, go
Yeah,
to MIT.
exactly. Right. And
And he became a wizard. Is that we actually I have actually questions for you, and some of it has to do with AI. So you're on the right track right now.
Mm.
so yeah, he went, and so I was like, I gotta know what this is about. So I saw in this book stand at my local mall, the Fellowship of the Ring, the Bantam edition. I still have it. Um,
Oh, he's got up and
actually,
left. He's got to go get his book.
um, it's
Oh,
one of my prized possessions.
Oh, I have that
Uh,
one. Yes, it's the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
1973 paperback.
yeah,
oh.
yeah. The Valentine
I
paperback.
can beat you. Mine's falling apart.
And yeah, so I have this. I have the Two Towers. I mean, I lent The Hobbit out to my daughter, and she destroyed it.
Hey,
But
these are heirloom books by now, right?
I know. I still love these. I still have them, and I bought it and I read it, and I was just absolutely entranced by, I mean, by just the world just the numinous quality of the world that
Mhm.
Tolkien had created, even
I'm
though I
sure
had
you
trouble
used
following
that
it.
term at 12.
No, no, it's something I only felt, and I did. I really felt it. I mean, and in many ways, um, my entire life now, I guess like the last 45 years or so, it has been an effort to just like recapture that. And I have found really no other author that does that, that recaptures that strangeness. I remember, just feeling, entering this really strange world, and also finding the world around me was really strange as well, and so yeah, so I read through it, even though I it was confusing, and even though the maps in the Valentine edition, they're horrible actually. They're
Yeah,
just
they're
really,
too the lines are too
yeah,
fat, so you can't read the
yeah,
labels.
they're
Like
really bad. So
the graphic reproduction is not that
yeah,
great.
I mean,
Yeah.
you couldn't even find I couldn't find Isengard. It's like, where is it? Where is it? So, of course, later I have Fonstad's Atlas of Middle Earth, which is great.
Yes,
Um,
we're gonna bore everybody here. It's like
I think
just to
I,
like
I feel
name our bibliography. So okay, have you tried reading Fonstad alongside it and saying, did he actually? She claims that he gets all these times right on how long it takes him. It takes him 14 days from Weathertop to Rivendell. Is that exactly?
right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, she has the
How
itinerary and
deeply
everything.
can we get you can go into the nerd level of
Exactly.
how
I
Yeah.
feel
far
I feel like I'm
I
eavesdropping on a club that I'm not a member of.
Well, it was kind of,
the
I also,
12-year-old version of how we read
12-year-old.
Tolkien.
I mean,
Adorable.
this was the very end of the 70s, and it's kind of like weird. It was a weird but wonderful time in a way to be a Tolkien fan, because it was well known. I mean, because obviously, like, I had this friend who was into Tolkien, and people, but it was certainly not part of the popular culture at all.
Mm.
I mean, so in a way, it was
You mean
known,
in
but it was still,
comparison to with the way it is with the movies?
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Today,
Do
Yeah.
I
either
mean, like,
work?
and, and there's a great scene in, I think it's Stranger Things, where they're going to get Vecna, and this, I think Eddie, who's the DM of the group, he gives a speech about going into Mordor and blah blah blah, and one of the kids, Steve, looks at another one's like, "What's Mordor?" It's like, I mean, you
The
wouldn't be
cool
able to
kid.
do that today. I mean, everyone, even knows, because of the movies, everyone knows what Mordor is. But back
I
then,
wanted to ask both of you a question. Now you both read this in the late 1970s, and it wasn't part of the culture yet. But I remember the Rankin and Bass TV production of
right?
it.
No, there was,
You
yeah,
That
yeah,
was 1981.
yeah,
Was it that late? I thought it was earlier than that.
I think so.
Okay.
I remember seeing it in the theater. So wait. You mean the Hobbit? Wait, which one are we thinking of? The Hobbit or the Lord of the
Actually,
Rings?
they did the Lord of the Rings.
The
There might have been
Hobbit
the
one.
Hobbit
There
as
was a
well.
television version of the Hobbit,
Yes.
right. They did the Hobbit,
and
yeah,
I
and then they
have
did,
in my book still a clipping from the newspaper of the picture of the Hobbit
yeah,
of Bilbo from
yeah,
that.
yeah,
But that was like
right,
sort of cute, and
yeah,
the
yeah,
and the Lord of the Rings one was sort of um no lines, right? How would you describe that art, right? It's like all just kind of swatches of color and
right,
monstrous,
right,
and yeah,
right.
Mm.
and kind of weirdly, I mean, it was sort of trippy for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think the animator, like, also worked on the old Spider-Man
hmm.
series from the 60s, which is also very trippy. Um, and also, the Lord of the Rings movie only ended at Helm's Deep. The Battle of Helm's Deep only did like half of the of the of the book. So
My dragon is joining us again. He did this
yeah,
last time, and I realized I've had there's nothing, the internet is alive with how you don't have your dog on your live stream. So Drake, come here, sweetheart, love, stop it, come,
I remember
come,
watching The
come, come.
Hobbit on television when I was a child and thinking it was just very dark. And I think it was just the type of
right.
animation they were
Yeah, yeah, I
using.
think so.
So
Because
it was,
because
it,
The Hobbit is more of a cheerful story, although, I mean, there are dark elements to it, but because
yeah, it's
it was meant
definitely,
for children.
yeah.
Um, but yeah,
So
so yeah,
this
I
is
was
not
like,
what I asked you. I asked you how you were teaching it, and I realized
oh
we end up,
yeah, yeah,
All
right,
right.
and
And
the
right,
then I
thing is,
exactly.
no,
interrupted.
but
Sorry.
this is good, because when I ask my students, like, how did you get to it? I'm, they love telling about how I got it, because I mean, it usually is like there's usually a friend, like an elf friend, like
Right, right.
someone who brings you into the story. So my mom actually gave me the books. She's never read them. She has no clue what was in them. I don't even know how she found them. They must have been, and you said at the mall, which is like another, like,
Yeah,
complete dating, that
right. I know,
she
I
and
know.
it was the box set with the Numenorian um like heraldry on it, which it took me years and years and years to even know what those pictures were, right? I don't
Yeah,
think it
yeah,
was like
yeah.
it just sort of arrived
Right.
mysteriously with
Yeah,
the art and the pictures and things like that. But when I ask the students how they come to it, it's usually, oh, an older sibling or my mom. I mean, a lot of them, my parents gave me the books and things like that. So it's interesting that most of our stories begin with this: I had someone to bring me into it. There's somebody
sure.
else who was showing me the
Mm.
story.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, fellowship and friendship are like
Yeah.
major themes, in Tolkien, and actually, the other person is my wife,
Okay.
because we that's funny. We One of the things, interestingly enough, when we started dating, the movies came out. Um, and I remember, we went and saw the movies together, and this is
Oh my.
before we were married. Actually, we were dating, and
Well, it is
um,
about, it is a romance. This is
yeah, it
appropriate.
is.
Yes.
And Tolkien calls it a romance. He doesn't say it's fantasy. He says it's a I think heroic romance was the genre he claimed for it. But um but yeah, so then of course after seeing the movies, because I had forgotten about Tolkien, I hadn't read him in years,
Mm.
and so after the movies, I was really, and then after reading the books, I was like, wow, Peter Jackson took a lot of liberties. But anyway, but at the time, it seemed like a really faithful adaptation. Um, and although one thing that Jackson got right was the casting. I mean,
Oh yeah.
all the characters in the movie looked exactly like what I had imagined them in my when I
Mm.
read it back when I was 12. So, and that was uncanny, actually, how close Jackson was in the casting.
Yeah, there's all
Um,
sorts of I mean, it's like I have a completely binary on vision interpretation of Jackson. On the one hand, it's the casting's beautiful, the sets are beautiful. I mean, he def and I mean that he did them as models so that even, it's
yeah,
not
I
the
know.
CGI curse is not there yet. That and he had the right artists like I guess Alan Lee and so,
And
the
Alan Lee and oh God, who am I? Shoot, I'm blanking on the other one too. There's another famous one.
and
Uh,
in Howard Shore's music and like there's
right,
so much good about it. And then and you go back and want to rewatch them now, and then he's like rearranged the script and giving the wrong words to the wrong characters, and it's like
right, right,
and there's all these extra bits with Arwen that are completely out of character, and I'm just like,
right.
oh.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
know.
frustrating because you want to go is like what you're saying about how the numinous feeling of it, he got so much of that right, and then he
He did.
wrecked
He did.
so much.
I know, I know. Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship to
Yes.
the movies, too. But my wife said, "Oh, why you love it? Why don't you teach a course in it?" It's like, "Oh, no, no, no. I just want it to be, a hobby that I love. I don't want to make it into work and so forth and so on." But finally, she prevailed upon me. I offered the course. I think it's Tolkien as philosopher. I had to do that because I'm in the philosophy department, and teaching the course was great. I had so much fun. The students were just so enthusiastic. They were really great. And so yeah, and so I just offered it. I think it was on a 3-year cycle, I
Hmm.
believe, because it was a special topics course, and so it had to be. I could only run it 3 times before having to, before I had to actually, formally apply for its inclusion in the catalog and so forth. So at least that's the rule at my university. So I offered it 3 times, and it was a big hiatus, and then I offered it again. And as I taught it, I became more familiar with the unpublished or
Right.
posthumously published works, the secondary literature, and I guess over time, I just began. I figured, well, maybe there's a book in this course. I mean, the book sort of emerged organically out of teaching the course, which is very different from my other stuff. Which is why actually I'm happier with this book than my other stuff, because it just did emerge organically out of teaching the course and my interactions with the students,
Hmm.
and so in a way it's kind of it's more of myself speaking rather than just sort of you know speaking academies.
Well, I will say it's a lovely book. I really really enjoyed
Thank you.
reading it, and
Thank
so
you.
getting having you here to talk about it is just my treat, right? It's like this is great, but I do have the thing is I never properly introduced you. We just jumped in, right? So
Mhm.
you're you're at LaSalle
Okay.
University,
Right.
and we've actually talked about LaSalle. He's a great teacher, right?
Right. Yeah, it's a patron saint of teachers.
Boys
Yeah.
in the 18th century wrote a handbook of manners, right?
You're
The,
right. Yeah, he wrote, and also some works of pedagogy.
right.
He was, of course, he was a priest um, in the France of Louis XIV, and he was on he was on the trajectory of becoming a canon lawyer, and I think also he was going to get a benefice which would have provided him a very comfortable income and so forth, but he noticed that there was all these boys in
Like
the streets of France.
poor boys.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Who needed instruction, and there were these teachers who begged him to help them set up a community of teachers, and so he abandoned his benefice and all the other ecclesiastical preferments to start this order of teachers. Um,
That's
And so, yeah,
wonderful.
and
That's great.
yeah, yeah,
So not only are you at a Catholic university, you are Catholic,
yes.
and your students are Catholic?
Uh, I
Somewhat.
don't know,
Okay. No, so but
yeah,
I'm curious because this means this is that you're teaching in a context that's somewhat different from mine, right?
right.
A
That
lot.
well,
Well,
I
I
mean,
don't
cause well,
know how.
University of Chicago, it's like we're secular Baptist. I don't know what we are, right? It's like
Right,
we're definitely not Catholic. But we
right,
get Catholic students in my class, and I have, saying like the variety of approaches that people. I mean, we've been talking about how we read the book growing up and as children, and you made the this. I haven't. I think Casey watches Stranger Things. I haven't ever seen it,
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
so I have
Oh,
no idea
you'd
what you're
probably
talking
like it
about.
actually.
But
It's a lot of nostalgia, but I think you might like it. It's very well done.
oh, well, I've heard of it, right? So, but I haven't seen it. But so that I'm curious what do your students in your context, what do they expect from the class, right? You say it's
right.
and
Yeah,
also
I
that
mean,
you're in philosophy, which I mentioned at the outset, which is actually super duper important because I have some questions for you about your perspective looking at Tolkien as a philosopher, which I think is
right.
actually really unusual in Tolkien
Yeah,
scholarship.
yeah. Well, a couple things. As far as my students go, it's hard to tell. I don't. I
Do,
mean,
do you
really, because
ask
I don't know
them?
how.
Do you ask them?
I mean, I no, I don't actually. Maybe I should. But I don't know how meaningful. It used to because the university keeps, or at least it did keep. I don't know how up to date they are. They used to keep statistics on the percentage of students who are Catholic and so forth and so on. Although there seems to be, I don't know why, there seems to be this push to get more non-Catholic students. I don't know exactly why,
We on the
but I
Mosaic
don't.
Ark are here to champion being Catholic.
Yes.
Right, right.
Everybody get in
I
the
mean,
Ark. Yeah, everybody get in.
right, exactly.
No, being
And
not
but
Catholic, get on here. You're gonna drown.
I
Get
I
on the
don't know
Ark.
how much that identification is meaningful anymore. Because
Hmm.
I think for most of our students, their religious affiliation is very weak. I mean, there's some. I mean,
But do
there's
they
there's
come
some
to
who
your
do.
class wanting? I mean, this is another thing. It's like one of the things about recovery that you didn't put in the book, but I'm now suddenly thinking about is recovering being Christian.
Right. And of course, what I do in my classes, I try to expose them I guess expose them to a counter narrative,
Hmm.
or a narrative that's counter to the secular one, through philosophy and through Tolkien. I mean, I know my son, for example, he's a senior in high school and he's going to a Jesuit high school
Hmm.
here in Philadelphia, and he's taking a course right now actually called Christianity through Lewis and Tolkien.
Right.
Um,
That's
This is what I
nice.
was expecting you to say.
and
Yours was like in it
and
because I've had students come to my class from high school and they've said that they've read Tolkien as a particularly Christian work, which I'm like, oh, that's
yeah,
interesting. Because
yeah,
I also have students who are desperately, resisting it being anything but the sort of fairy story with magic and,
right, right,
how can you dare say that it's a Christian story? What are you talking
sure.
about? And being worried about that, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, like, my son's taking a course that's specifically, very openly and explicitly, Christianity through Lewis and Tolkien.
Mm.
And he loves it, which is great. We're talking about it. I say, oh, it's like, use my book, cite my book if you can, in the class. But no, with my students, uh, I guess I just want to I just unfold the ideas, I think, and let the ideas speak for themselves. I mean,
Oh,
I remember
stealth Catholic. I like that.
exactly. I'm very stealthy in the way I do it. Well, I don't see as a philosopher. My job is not to preach, at all.
Right.
It's to question, and it's to get them to question. And I'm I use some of my favorite philosophers, of course, Augustine and Aquinas, of course. Pascal is
Hmm.
another one of my favorites. I love Plato, actually, a pagan, but I think, he opens up, a lot of vistas and avenues for questioning. And even Nietzsche, actually, I really enjoy teaching Nietzsche because in many ways he also um, makes some powerful arguments against, you might say, the secular paradigm as just kind of a counterfeit religion in and of itself. Um, but but so yeah, so I see my job as sort of getting my students to question dominant narratives, which they just kind of grow up just not questioning at all. So
Right.
um and I mean, obviously, the brighter students can tell my where I'm coming from, but generally speaking, I try I don't I keep my cards close to my vest, and I don't I'm not particularly open because I want them to see me as just genuinely questioning, as someone
Well,
who
this
genuinely wants to know and wants to question.
right, this fits with the tone of your book, which the thing is I was impressed because it's published by Catholic University
Mhm.
Press. But what I felt reading it was it is stealthy. You are stealthy. Because well, you have Bradley Beerzer as writing your foreword for you, right?
Yeah, right,
And
exactly.
and
Yeah.
and his is one of the early books that. So I first taught the course in 2005, and so a lot of like the baseline reading that I did was then, and then sort of whether you can keep up with it. A lot of stuff has come out over the years in the last 20 years, but I haven't really changed my own mainframe for the course.
Mhm.
And I know you've watched Forge of Tolkien, so I know you know
Right.
my take
Sure.
too, that it more about the subcreation and creativity and the sort of the course as a craft. I mean, it's like this is how
Right.
we get ourselves into thinking like Tolkien and making art like Tolkien.
Right.
Um, but Berzer was one of the first ones that I read that was talking about it specifically from a theological perspective,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah.
And there was a kind of trick for me in this. Oh, so Beerzer's your blurb, he's got your introduction, and yet your take doesn't feel quite like that. And yet, by the end of the book, well, one, you end in hope, which is very beautiful. But I think I get your purpose a bit better now, because it sneaks up on you that you've made this incredibly theologically robust argument, but it's not by way of saying like he does, or what Stratford Caldecott, or
Mhm.
who are the other great Catholic readers of Tolkien. Um, now I'm blanking. There's several,
Yeah.
right? No, and
Right.
the thing
Yeah.
is, one of the things I wanted to ask you was, so you're coming at this in your teaching, it sounds like, as a philosopher. Your scholarship is in philosophy. That you work on Eckhart and mysticism. That we
Right.
we we do need to talk about that. Um,
Yeah.
but that your sort of disciplinary approach is going to be different from mine, because mine is thinking about it as like a crafted thing in
Sure.
time or something like that, right?
Right.
Because I'm a
Right. Right.
historian.
Right.
So, um as a philosopher, what is your take on the sort of field of Tolkien studies? And I do say
Uh,
this, I take this quite seriously, because being a philosopher in medieval studies right now is a bit of a lonely place. Am I right?
yeah.
Right? It's
Yeah.
like
It is.
there are not so many of you out there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I've tried to find you sometimes at Kalamazoo, and it's like, where are all the philosophers?
Yeah.
Who
I'm the weird. Yeah. I'm
you're
definitely
kind
the
of
weirdo
weird in a
one.
lot of different, so you've got some interesting intersections going on here. It's like, as a philosopher reading Tolkien, but as a Catholic who's trying to set the questions up so that you end up in Tolkien's worldview, which is obviously
Yeah.
also my purpose, but you're coming at it from a completely different perspective, and I'd
Sure.
love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, I mean that's the one thing. I mean, one of the great things about Tolkien is it seems to be a playground for amateurs in the good sense. I mean,
Yeah.
of course there are some real serious Tolkien scholars, and I don't. I mean, I made use of their work, and their scholarship is just astounding and impressive, and so forth. But but I like how the area of Tolkien studies does welcome is very sort of welcoming and pretty open to people outside the field, who bring their expertise, I think, to Tolkien. And what this is one of the great things about Tolkien is that he is so amenable to interpretation, to various crafts and expertises, so to speak. Um,
Or that we
uh,
need, I mean, when I teach my class, I'm thinking, well, one, I do not have the philology. to be able to
Hmm.
talk about him properly. But you have the ability to explain realism and nominalism, which be warned, you're about to be asked. But
Right.
but the thing is that for me was astonishing because you've brought out elements of Tolkien that I've never seen before.
Right. Right.
Because and I think you make a wonderful case that he is not himself writing as a philosopher,
Right.
and
And that's the
yet
thing. Yeah.
the philosophical truths that he's baked into his stories are really robust. And
Yeah.
as far as I know, you're the only one who's done this.
Yeah. Although
Is that
there's a book
fair?
by
Am I missing people?
well, there's the guy Jonathan McIntosh.
Oh yes,
He
he's
did
good.
a lot of stuff on his on the Thomism involved in Tolkien, and I used his work quite a bit in
That's the
writing mine.
Imperishable Flame book, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right, which is a great book. And but yeah, I mean, in a way, it's funny we're talking about being stealthy. I mean, Tolkien himself was trying to be stealthy.
Mm-hmm.
He specifically took out any explicit references to religion, or at least most. I mean, there are some, but certainly there's very little explicit description of religious rites or practices or whatever. Mainly because, of course, he wanted to build that into the story itself. I know Sandra Meisel, one of the scholars of Tolkien, she talks about Tolkien's sacred geography. How there isn't any sort of explicitly religious rites or ceremonies or cults, but there are sacred centers, there's sacred places, there's sacred um, elements. Of course, the trees, which are not mentioned in the Lord of the Rings, but of course are prominent in the Silmarillion, and so forth. So yeah, Tolkien himself was being stealthy himself, because he wanted to absorb all the religious elements into the story itself, into the world itself. Um, but in doing so, of course, he had to create a whole different world, and of course, in many ways, he writes in the mode of an historian in some places, right? And so you have the chronic, you have all the annals, the Tale of Years, and
Mm-hmm.
so forth, and the appendices, and so forth. And he even says, I think, at one point that he, in many ways, preferred history to fiction when he was a young boy and young man, and sometimes it reads like Gibbon, um, so you
I
can
don't know
see,
whether that's a good or bad thing.
I don't know either, but certainly though, like the decline and fall of Gondor and so forth,
Very true. Very true.
yeah, and he has these names that remind you of Gothic kings as well as the Byzantine Empire and so forth and so on.
Well,
But yeah,
that's
but
true, and that's why I say I know how to deal with that level of his work. Although I can't do the actual language history, the true
right,
philological studies. I completely rely on Tom Shippey for that.
yeah, right, and of course Tom
Right.
Shippey is great on that, yeah,
He
because he does the
he's
linguistic stuff.
right. He can do all of the actual linguistics.
Um,
And I've just been reading a lot of his work on Beowulf, right? So he knows
right,
absolutely the backstory of the text that Tolkien was working with, and
right,
that's lovely. But the philosophical underpinnings
right.
are well, I don't know whether we're going to terrify anybody, but we don't care right now because like on the Ark we go into deep waters right at the beginning,
Sure,
right
sure.
at the outset. Um,
And I'm standing at the shore waving at you as you do.
yes, well I was trying to.
I don't know any of these people, but I'm
This
interested.
is
Yeah,
so we have developed on the Mosaic Ark a very clear hierarchy of things. I'm clearly Gladriel or some other kind of elf that is like way too old for everybody. And Casey is my hobbit. She's actually shorter than
right,
I am, so this is not as like
right.
this is
I
this
am pretty short, I
this
gotta
is
say.
but she's
It
she's
fits.
she's the one that asks the questions that Sam would ask. So
Right,
yeah.
exactly. And of course, Sam always has the most. He always has the most perceptive
He does.
comments in the Lord of the Rings. He always had, he always gets to the, where Gandalf is off somewhere else and Denethor, whatever. Sam always gets to the point. And he always gets to the essential. And he always says the thing that is most, I think, most profound sometimes. And certainly with regard to like the philosophical underpinnings. Yeah, and, it's funny. Tolkien was not trained as a philosopher, of course,
Not at
which I
all.
think
Right.
which is an advantage, right? I think because I think philosophers make terrible novelists and write, and generally, um, but
Well,
because
you say some pretty harsh things about philosophers. Let's
well,
just be fair.
yeah, well,
You're not really a very much of a fan of Descartes, I can tell, or
no, no,
Kant,
no, no, I'm
and
not actually.
therefore I want you to explain these things. It's
Yeah, I mean,
chapter
like, as I
2.
mentioned, one of my favorite philosophers is Pascal, who was one of the biggest critics of Descartes in 17th century France, um, and mainly because I think I'm attracted to a strain of philosophical thought uh, that sees the job of philosophy is to get us beyond philosophy, sort of paradoxically. It's to get us to the edge of reason,
Mm.
not to stay in reason. Of course, it uses reason to get us to a place that where we go beyond reason. um, and some of my favorite, some of the mainstays of my teaching, as well as my thinking, are like Plato. I think this is what Plato does.
Mm.
Um, Although in many ways, I'm more of an Aristotelian than a Platonist, but Plato is, I think, brilliant in that sense. He understands that there's a where the deepest truths can only be expressed through myth. Right? And this is, of course, the great strange thing about reading Plato. Plato constantly criticizes the poets um, for uh, for portraying the gods in a morally questionable way. Uh, he he um, he also criticizes the poets for not understanding, the depth of their poems and so forth and so on. But in a sense, he himself is a poet. This great writer of dialogues, this brilliant writer and poet. And for him, the truth is something that the ultimate truth is something that reason cannot grasp by itself. It has to go. We have to go to the edge, and then whatever's beyond has to take over, so to speak.
Mhm.
And of course, this is why I'm attracted to medieval mystics like Eckhart, particularly.
Mm.
And I think there's a very strong element in Aquinas too, where reason passes over into what he calls intellectus, this sort of intuitive understanding of first principles. Um, Pascal is very much like this too. He talks about the spirit of geometry as opposed to the spirit of finesse or knowledge of the heart.
Mhm.
Um, and so on. Yeah. And I think Tolkien is and this is what this is where I see Tolkien fitting in. Tolkien, he's trying to express truths that cannot be actually expressed by conventional philosophy. It can only be expressed through myth, through story, through narrative. Um, because in a way, we are temporal beings, although you know we are, as I say in my as I describe in my chapter on eternity, we are temporal beings who are, in a sense, um, moving towards eternity. We have an eternal element, and actually, in a sense, we are aware of time precisely because we have an eternal element within us,
Mhm.
I think. Um, but we mostly understand the deepest truths through story, and through narrative. Um, and I think that's why Tolkien himself stayed aloof from the philosophers, because in many ways I think he saw story and myth making as doing something deeper than what philosophers normally do. Um, and I think the best philosophers know that and express that. Um, and so uh, and so in that sense, that's why, for example, I think the Bible is in the form of a narrative. Right? This is why God reveals himself not through scientific treatises but through the stories of people encountering him through various events in history and so forth. Um, and so um, and so I think that's one of the reasons why Tolkien is a deeper philosopher than most philosophers in many ways.
Mm.
Well, certainly. So if I can just pull you in, right?
Hmm.
Um to the negative. Which is, you should be able to do with this Eckhart, right? Because he talks about the things you can't say. Um
Right.
that So what you've just been describing are the happy parts of the problem. It's like what Tolkien solves for us, but
Uh-huh.
we're in a deeply, we're all deeply depressed and negative and broken and disenchanted. And
Right.
in your description of what's happened to modernity, particularly from, in this case, you'll appreciate this because it's where we are in writing Draco Chemicus,
Yeah, it's sounding familiar as you continue to talk
from the
this one. Yeah.
17th century. Everything
Right.
gets broken, right? And no, and very specifically what, and this is what I'd love to hear you unpack a bit, because I think we've all heard about things like, oh, the realists and the nominalists getting us into trouble, and Kant. Everybody thinks,
Right.
oh, like Kant. I'm going to talk about the critique of pure reason, and that makes me sound smart. And you just lay in, you lay. I mean, maybe it was in the little interview that you did on the Catholic site, but
Hmm.
it's what Tolkien is fighting. It's not sort of vague, sort of um like, oh, just a loss, right? We're
Right.
recovering something, so we just sort of dropped it on the way, on the roadside, and we need to go find it. No, it's something that's been desperately badly broken, and it's not just the fall,
Hmm.
it's the machine.
Hmm.
And that we
Right.
are here with, Descartes does it, and Kant makes it worse, and
Right.
they all end in like, Saruman is the, the more visible version of it, but Sauron is really the bad guy. Please explain. Right. No, because
Okay.
that's quite serious, because it's
Yeah.
what,
No, that's a big question.
it's your
Well,
chapter 2.
yeah, yeah. Well, there's what he the fall, mortality, and the machine. He
Exactly.
talks,
Yeah.
and he talks about this as summing up his thinking about myth and its place in recovery. Um, in That's a long letter he wrote to Milton Waldman, who was a editor, I think, at Collins. He was kind of impatient with Alan Unwin, and he also wanted to have the Silmarillion published with the Lord of the Rings, which was just not going to happen. But he really made this valiant attempt to do it. And so, yeah, so he describes the whole thrust of his story, and he talks about, there's no story without a fall. Right?
Right.
He says this is presupposed by every story uh, known to us, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you ascribe to Christianity or not. Almost every story, or at least any good story, starts with a fall, with the brokenness of human beings, and part of the result of this fall is mortality. Yeah? Now we are trapped in time, in a limited time at that. Um, and so, questions of, what do I do with this time? How do I arrest time? How do I stop time?
Hmm.
What is true eternity? Is eternity just endless time? Of course, for Tolkien, it is not. It is actually, that is what hell is. Hell is actually limitless duration.
Mm.
Um, this is what the ring wraiths fall into. Eternity is something that transcends time. It's not some sort of duration, and we could talk about that later, but because I think that's kind of central, actually, I think, to Tolkien's preoccupations. I mean, he's really preoccupied with death, with mortality, with time, and the possibility of some sort of eternal mode of existence, which is why he brings in all these different, what I call, time wells
Hmm.
within Lord of the Rings. I know you talk about it in the Forge of Tolkien. Where you have a place like Lorien, where time doesn't seem to pass, or Rivendell, where each day, each day passes without thinking about the next, and you're not really paying attention necessarily. You make plans for the future, but the future has no hold on you, nor the past, and so forth and so on. So, and then, of course, obviously, then you have the machine. How do we deal with this mortality, this fall? Well, we try to do it with um, we try to uh, you know repair the effects of this through, not through s- you know transformation through virtue, not through not through genuine fellowship with our creator, and so forth and so on, but through artificial means, through means that for over which we have control, and that is, the machine. Although I have to say, I mean, one of the things I think that's really interesting about Tolkien is that, although he is focused on the machine, and I think in many ways Sauron represents the spirit of the machine,
Hmm.
to dominate and control, not only all life, but also not only all exterior life, but also even interior life. The human being, as as Lewis talks about in the Abolition of Man, where the machine, we in our efforts to dominate the world, we end up dominating ourselves. Um, and of course, people like Descartes and Bacon, who was a contemporary of Descartes, specifically saw this new mechanistic philosophy as a way of repairing the fall. I mean, they specifically, mention this. Um, but in many ways, I think, but also I think Tolkien, one of the things to emphasize, Tolkien also realizes that the fall goes deeper than the machine, and it goes deeper or further back than just Descartes and Bacon and all those guys, right? Because in many ways, you have the figure of Morgoth, who's an even more primeval
Hmm.
evil, right? And you also have these creatures like the Watcher in the Water and the Balrog, and Shelob, who are actually not part of Sauron's, or not under the control of Sauron, nor work for him. They have completely, they have ends of their own, and I think that points to an even deeper level of brokenness. But the machine, of course, is the latest and most pervasive aspect of the fall, which dominates our view of the world, and so the defeat of Sauron is in many ways, I think, emblematic of that.
So the thing is, I think the reason I was really struck with you saying Kant gets us there, right? Because the way people tend to argue now is on the internet, as we are now in the machine,
Mhm.
um, is well, one is sort of there's the fear of mysticism, which we could talk about, but the if only generically, if only we could return to the Enlightenment, or only if we could get back our actual previous structured thinking, and right now instead we're all drowning in endless images and irrationality and inability to put together lengthy arguments and such like that. And
Mhm.
so finding out that Kant, who is allegedly it was something else. No, it was something about Casey. You've got to help me here, because this was the thing I said that you were going to have to ask about
Oh, okay.
how Kant
Yeah.
gives us AI, right?
Yeah.
The sense of Kant, Descartes and Kant privilege consciousness over incarnation,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that you have the distinction between the body and soul, and the privileging of the soul, which means the privileging simply of mind, so that we end
Mhm.
up with this claim, insane as it is, that you could, I don't know, put your brain, put your, not your brain, your mind in a robot, right?
It's just a very
Right,
old
right.
heresy, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
It's just a very old heresy that says, your mind is
Right,
everything and
right.
your soul is
Yeah,
everything, your
this
body's
radical
nothing. Just
dualism, yeah,
transfer it.
this sort of like a form of Gnosticism, really. This extreme
Right.
dualism of mind and body, um, and in many ways, Sauron is kind of this disembodied, you know,
Right. You can't
um,
see him at all
this
in the Lord of
yeah,
the
this
Rings. Right.
disembodied reason. This he is actually he's in many ways he is pure reason. um, he
Right, which is
Right.
he
what they're trying to get to AI
yeah,
with,
yeah,
right? They're trying to get
yeah,
it there where it can think for
right,
itself
right.
and make decisions,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
not programmed into
Yeah,
it.
so he
Well,
is
this is
pure
this is
reason.
like more. So you have Morgoth. Tolkien writes, did not merely desire to dominate or control Middle Earth like his servant Sauron, but rather he had a mad desire to destroy the world if he could not completely dominate it. And
Right,
this is
right,
from Morgoth's Ring. Sauron had never reached this stage of nihilistic madness. Oh, this is Tolkien with Robert
right,
quoting him. He did not object to the existence of the world so long as he could do what he liked with it. He still had the relics of positive purposes that descended from the good of the nature in which he began. It had been his virtue, and therefore also the cause of his fall and of his relapse, that he loved order and coordination and disliked all confusion and wasteful friction. So Tolkien here, as he's describing, it's like Sauron loved the machine. He
right,
wants
right.
it to be this perfect machine. It
Yeah,
was the
yeah.
apparent will and power of Melkor to effect his designs quickly and masterfully that had first attracted Sauron to him. Sauron
Mhm.
had, in fact, been very much like Saruman, and would so still and so still understood him quickly and could guess what he would be likely to think, even without the aid of Palantiri or of spies, whereas Gandalf eluded and puzzled him.
Palantiri, sorry.
That's what we wanted to get to. We have a devious purpose.
Oh,
See our
Yeah, there's
our
isn't there
our
there's
our
well,
stealth problem
has
He
here.
does this
there is a
week.
there is a tech company called Palantir, right? I
Yes,
think.
this is
Is
what
that
we wanted to talk about.
Yeah,
really?
yeah, I know. Uh, yeah, I mean, this is and in many ways, again, Sauron is kind of like this pure reason that wants to order everything, but is this pure disembodied reason, right? Um, that doesn't that wants to free everything from any sort of from the scandal of any sort of peculiarity or of any place or time or
Oh yeah.
or any particular embodiment, which of course describes the modern managerial mindset perfectly. It's only gotten worse. I mean, Tolkien already saw it in the 40s and 50s. So did C.S. Lewis.
The Romantic
But
poets saw it in the 19th century already,
yeah,
didn't they?
and it's just metastasized since then, basically. And yeah, and then but even even more primeval is is Melkor or Morgoth, which
Mm.
is this mad chaotic destruction, of which, interestingly enough, the machine is kind of very distinct from, but also comes from it. It's sort of born from it. um, and so that's one of the things. I mean, one of the things that fascinates me about Tolkien are his monsters,
Mm-hmm.
and how they how they invade. They and for Tolkien, he was very specific about keeping. And one of the reasons why I love Beowulf is that Beowulf, with the monster and its critics, that Beowulf didn't just stay on the political level, just didn't say, talked about the political relations between Geats and oh God, who are some of the other people
The
in
Danes.
Beowulf? I'm
I
trying to
just taught
the
Beowulf
Danes, the Geats,
yesterday, so
okay,
I actually have a pretty strong
the,
read on
the
this.
Geats and the Danes and so forth.
Yeah.
And he said the story would be unremarkable and forgettable if it were just a political story. What makes it what makes it universal and timeless are the monsters, right? Because the monsters, signify something beyond the realm of the purely political, the purely human. And therefore, it signifies something, an evil that both a good and evil, that, or maybe put it this way, it signifies a moral universe, that there is in the universe itself, a primal good and evil forces, that are beyond just simple, that are just simple, beyond simple human politics or machinations.
Right. And Beowulf's obsessive drive to kill the
Right,
monsters
exactly. Yeah.
for sake of justice, but vengeance, but also because of justice, of moral justice, and
Yeah.
a great
Yeah,
immoral injustice.
which is what gives the story its power. I mean, and it gives its universal, as I said, it's universal and timeless quality. And I think that's what Tolkien was aiming at too, with with Morgoth, with Sauron, with Shelob, and the Watcher in the Water, and the Balrog, and so forth and so on. I mean, um, that there is that we are kind of like in this island, this little island of light in a vast universe, which has great powers for both good and evil. um, and that, in a sense, recovers for us a sense of our world as significant, right? As not just simply dead matter or meaningless, or meaningless forces, but is something that is charged with meaning, and charged with symbolism, and charged with moral value.
You've said so many things. I have so many questions now. We're gonna go back to AI.
Okay.
No, because I had never properly appreciated before I read your book that Sauron had this machine level to him, and that passage that you pointed out, right? It's like and this is Tolkien saying it, so I had available to me, and I missed it,
Hmm.
that he loved order and coordination and disliked all confusion and wasteful friction. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
and certainly what you've been just saying about the morality of it, that I do think I do actually have to completely disagree with you on the reading of Beowulf, but we'll come back to that maybe.
Okay.
Um, uh,
I'm not a scholar of Beowulf,
well,
so
Tom Shippey is, and that's where I
more
get
than
my
will
new reading of Beowulf from.
I'm more than willing to be corrected on reading Beowulf. So
But the thing is, you did point to me to this sense of the machine and the Kantian consciousness, and I'm trying to drag it to your question, Casey. Come on, get in here, jump in. You were
My,
worried
my,
because you were posting about it in Telegram in our
oh, right,
right?
right.
Okay, so there is a
That's to
guy
you, though,
out
not to the
there.
world.
We're trying to be concrete and particular here. Come on,
Okay, okay.
historian here. Right. That it's Peter Thiel who named
Yes.
his
mhm.
company
Right,
Palantir,
right,
right?
right,
Which
right.
I find absolutely hilarious because he does not seem to understand the significance of naming his
Or
company
does he?
Palantir, or does he?
Does he?
Which is
Yeah.
no,
That's
Which
which
the
may
is
be even
question.
more disturbing, actually.
well,
But yes,
so
I was disturbed.
Casey was disturbed by
I
something that
was
she saw today, and
discussing it with her.
we needed to ask you what you thought about it, but she needs to explain this first.
Okay, I'll explain
Yeah.
it. So, Peter Thiel has been given several talks about the Antichrist. Now, I think Peter
Uh-huh.
Thiel is a Christian. I've seen him interviewed. I think he is I think he's very well spoken, and I found him impressive. Um, and he's interested in Christianity, and he's of late very obsessed with the Antichrist. Now, he has said people who are against AI are gosh, he used a very specific word, almost like well, you're doing the work of the Antichrist. You're as
Mhm.
advanced troops
To be against
basically.
AI, right?
And if you oppose AI, if you oppose AI, you're
Okay.
actually helping the Antichrist. And I thought that's exactly what an
Yeah. I don't know
Antichrist would say.
what were the reasons he gave? I don't.
Hmm. I didn't read
Well, we
into
don't
it.
have it because
I
he's
should
giving
probably go
it
back and
said in the
read that.
article you found that the talks aren't recorded, they're secret,
Oh,
right?
you're
It's like 8 hours of eight.
correct. Yeah.
Okay, so
Well, they're
right,
not
so he's not.
secret, but they're by
This is not
invitation
something we can
only.
all watch and then consider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something it's simply reported that he said
Right.
after naming his company Palantir.
After naming his company Palantir. Yeah.
Right, and that being
Okay.
the it's the oh, there was another passage that you pointed out, this control of communication, right? Where
Yeah.
was that? Thinking that that true power would be. Sorry, now I've lost it. Carry on.
Okay. Well,
Oh, here it
if
is.
I'm correct,
Denethor.
right,
Denethor. It's at the end
right.
when you're talking
Hmm.
about Denethor and So this is you. Moreover, through his use of the Palantir, Denethor presumes to know more than he does. For this seeing stone allows him to see what others do not see. Which it does feel to me like what Teal likes about the idea of the Palantir is company is a monitoring system, right?
Yeah.
It
I
is
don't know exactly
he
what the
thinks like most
Palantir is.
modern
I mean,
men.
in for Peter Thiel.
Okay, this is Denethor still. He thinks, like most modern men and women, that he has access to superior knowledge because he has access to a superior means of communication.
Right.
And then you quote what he says, right? So it's like
Yeah.
the irony here is that the fleet sailing up the Anduin, bearing the black sails and borne by the wind, is the corsair fleet seized by Aragorn and his companions, and is therefore sailing to the rescue of Minas Tirith, not its destruction. In looking into the Palantir, Denethor saw only what Sauron wanted him to see. How does
Yeah.
Peter Thiel not understand this?
I don't know either. I don't know
Or
either.
does he?
Yeah, or maybe he does. I don't know, but um,
I don't no, I don't know either.
yeah,
Man, I'd love to be a fly on the wall in
but
that
yeah, the
conference.
Palantiri, and they are not a work of Sauron. They are, of course, the work of the men of Numenor
Mhm.
and so forth. And they rightfully belong to Aragorn and so forth. But yeah, in the wrong hands, they can become an instrument of manipulation and deception. Um, and of course, see, again, here, this is one of those principles that Tolkien always talks about. How evil manipulates and perverts what is either neutral or good. and of course the Palantiri is one example of that. Um,
But it
in
seems,
the
I mean,
realm of information now.
right, in the Palantiri, and to fits your discussion of it really well, that it's, I mean, it's in some ways, it's, so the Palantiri are like what we're doing right now, right? It's
Right, exactly. Yeah, seeing we're like in these seeing stones,
we're in
I
these
mean,
seeing stones, right? And
you
can
could
we
see Chicago, Charleston, Philadelphia, it's
got them set up on our different towers,
right,
right? And they're seen
exactly. Yeah,
across
yeah.
the space and
Right.
time. And can we tell? I just don't get why Teal doesn't get this, right? Can we tell that what we're seeing is real? Or are like Denethor looking into the Palantir and thinking that the black sails sailing up the river are in fact coming to destroy the city, when indeed they're Aragorn
Coming to save
coming
it.
to
Yeah.
save it. And so,
Mm.
or Sam, when Sam's not looking into Palantir, when he's looking into the Mayor of Gladriel, and she's saying, you can't use this necessarily as an image of what is or what is to come. It's just showing you things. So how do you know what it is? And that it's fascinating to me that the guys in tech who want to have these machines that can give them pure communication as far as they're concerned, right? It's like it's nothing but information in it, nothing but no, no grounding, no place, no landscape, no reality, which it seems to me is what, Robert, you're trying to show that Tolkien is trying to get us back to, right? How do we recover our in fact, like embeddedness in place? You had
Right.
a
Yeah.
really lovely discussion of um, nature, right?
Right.
And
Right.
the way in
And
which
fel
everything becomes
and also
sacred
and fellowship with other, with
and
other
true
beings,
fellowship. Yeah.
true fellowship, true friendship, I mean, because in many ways, again, we have, with social media, we have an ersatz fellowship, where, if you can call it that. I mean, yeah, and
Well,
yeah, I mean,
Casey
I
and I
think,
actually have met in person, so now it's
Yeah.
real.
yeah, sure, no, well, but I mean, this is often the case, I mean,
Right.
and I mean, my own children, I mean, they mostly meet their friends online. They don't, unlike when I was a teen, in order to be with my friends, I had to actually see them and go out with them, physically. And
You had telephones.
we had
But
telephones, but
clearly you weren't a girl. So
But you
that
usually had one telephone in the whole house. So.
well,
yeah,
that's
yeah, we
true.
all
But
went
the
down,
sort of when you're in middle school reading Tolkien and spending hours and hours and hours on the telephone,
right.
not talking to my girlfriends about Tolkien because I don't know if they were
And,
reading it, but
and I had a rotary phone and so
yeah.
forth. So,
So
I mean,
our old style,
I know.
communication
And you
device.
had the phone, and the phone could be off the hook and so forth. Which is kind of crazy. I was listening to an old song by
Right.
the punk band X called Your Phone is Off the Hook, but You're Not." And I'm like thinking, that's that song, that song doesn't make it, won't make any sense to my children. This is so
Isn't
bizarre.
that crazy? You have to
Yeah, I
explain it
know.
to them the way you would explain it like a joke in Chaucer.
Right, exactly. But getting back to the Palantir, yeah, I mean, this is, and of course, this has direct application. Tolkien loved application
Hmm.
of his work.
Oh
This has
yeah.
direct application to news media and social media, and we only, without, I think, without a thick network of friendships, and relationships, um, you know, of close relationships, either of kin or friendship, and of course, without any sort of, and of course, most of us spend our time in. Most young people spend their times indoors in front of screens, without that fellowship being extended to nature, and to language as well, which
Hmm.
is, even I think, for Tolkien, an even more fundamental layer. We are open to really grotesquely misinterpreting the information that we get, via the screen or via the phone or whatever, um, because we no longer have the interpretive tools, to situate that information into a larger interpretive framework. And so, I think this is one of the things that I think that Tolkien is talking about with the Palantir. Although, I mean, Denethor himself, was a Tolkien talks about Denethor himself being a man of great wisdom.
Right. But
But he also says that
be
towards the end,
more likely to be to be seduced by this kind of
but yeah, and towards the end, Tolkien also talks about how
communication. Yeah.
Denethor became a creature of politics. He
Mm.
he began to think no longer in terms of moral and metaphysical principles, but just simply in terms of political expediency, and that's what really made him prey to manipulation via the Palantir. Someone like Aragorn, who is you might say rooted in thick fellowships and knows you know is aware of the origins and nature of the Palantiri and so forth. He's not nearly as susceptible to being caught in the web of Sauron than someone like Denethor, who begins to think only in terms of politics, which is what Sauron does. Right? Sauron is also a political
Right.
creature,
Right.
and Saruman too. Saruman begins to think totally, completely in terms of politics as well. And for Tolkien, this is deadly, because it always leads to short-term thinking and therefore to very foolish, if not morally bad judgments.
Right. Well, so one of the, I don't know whether you saw this one. It wasn't in Forge of Tolkien series, but I did a Mosaic Ark solo one 2 years ago, I guess, on the radio as
Hmm.
Sauron's
The radio
mic,
tower.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
the tower. We were we on the Mosaic Ark are obsessed with Marshall McLuhan,
Hmm.
and the sort of communication, the effects of the media spiritually, which
Hmm.
Tolkien. I mean, it's like they were. McLuhan and Tolkien were nearly exact contemporaries,
Yeah, I think they were very close. Yeah.
and but whether they met each other, I don't know, because it's like maybe they were maybe Tolkien was a bit older.
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean, yeah,
Tolkien
they
was
were, they were,
Yeah,
older.
they, their careers certainly overlapped.
right.
Yeah,
And that as Catholics in the academy, they have to disguise things in variety of ways, so that you're saying the truth that people are going to revolt against if you get it labeled as Catholic, as we were
right,
talking about at the beginning. But that it is true because Catholic truths are grounded in reality.
right,
We
right.
learn
Which,
this we learn this on the journey on the ark. But that the Palantir do the thing that is the disembodied communication, which is the primary problem for all of our communication, that it's not incarnate anymore, which is
mhm,
why I was so taken with your pointing to the philosophical effects of the Cartesian and Kantian focus on consciousness and privileging of consciousness, so much so
mhm.
that the Palantir are like the perfect version of that privileging
Yeah,
of consciousness.
exactly.
That
Yeah,
they are completely instruments of will. If
yeah,
you read the it's in Unfinished Tales, I think, where it talks about the mechanism of the Palantir,
right.
and
Yeah,
that it's
yeah.
a problem
You have
of
to bend it. Yeah,
you have
you
to
have to
bend
bend
it
it
to
to your
your own
will.
will while
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
you're looking in. That's why Aragorn can mainly do it, and Pippin gets drawn in instantly.
right.
Right, that you
Exactly.
have
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be able to use your willpower to turn it to look at the things that you wanted. And Sauron, of course,
Right.
he's dominated them for so long that he can just make anybody see whatever they want. So he's like the
Hmm.
perfect propaganda machine.
Right. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and then and so but this for me is the real insight that you brought to what we're fighting, right? That Tolkien is able to show, and he doesn't say it in quite the media terms that McLuhan was. It's not that blunt, but it is really what we're up against,
Right.
which
Right.
is the propaganda and the language and the machines that are all
Right.
being used. Like in Tolkien's lifetime, the radio was used to send everybody to war.
Right. Right. And also too, I think for Tolkien, the big problem is that um, these sorts of communication, although they give us, modern communication, although as I said, it gives us the illusion of knowing way more, and in a way
Mm-hmm.
we do, right? There's so much more you could. I mean, my children can't imagine how I as a teenager had to like research colleges by going to the library and getting out the
Right.
catalogs and no websites and so forth and so on. But and so so it makes communication supposedly frictionless, right?
Right.
and efficient and so forth and so on. But one of the things I think we're finding is that it breeds despair. Um,
Yes. Yes.
this modern communication breeds despair. I mean, you could see it. I mean, you saw it during the COVID pandemic. Where how fear and manipulation is so much spreading fear. And manipulation is so much easier, frictionless
Just
through
like
these modern.
Sauron, right? Just projects it
Yeah,
straight into
exactly.
your it's straight into your limbic system, right?
And
You're
Mhm.
instantly afraid.
exactly, especially people. And especially now today that we're so atomized and isolated one from another. So as I said, without the thick fellowship of friends and family and kin and so forth and so on that you find like
Mhm.
among the hobbits, we are just we're easy prey not only to manipulation and to lie, but also to despair. I mean, people they think they know, and Gandalf says this. He says, Um, now I'm trying to think of the exact quote, but paraphrasing, despair is only for those who think they know all ends, right? They know the end of all
Which is where
things or the outcome
Denethor
of
ends
all
up. He
things.
thinks he knows
And
everything. Yep.
right, exactly. And so modern communication, and this is one of the things, and this is the problem with I think because of social media, modern communication, they think they
Mhm.
know the end of all things, but they don't. And so, and they look at the whether it's whether it's supposedly the climate emergency or whatever, we just don't know. Even the best scientists don't know. I mean, and the best scientists will tell you that we don't know and we can't know what's going to happen. For example, with the climate, just to use that as an
But
example.
the media of
Um,
course lives
and
off of
yet,
pretending
but,
it can predict.
but it can do, and so it breeds despair.
Which is something the
And so
media
we
also
live.
lives on
So we
because then people will keep tuning
right
in.
exactly. And of course people without hope also try to fill that with pleasure and with consumerism and so forth and so on. So the whole system is just like this incredible feedback loop. um, but of course, this cannot make up for the lack of hope, for the lack, for the despair that I think is so prevalent in our societies. We like to think, as I mentioned in the book, we like to think that we're so, modern people are very upbeat. We're very hopeful about the future and progress. But actually, I think it's the opposite. Modern people are doom laden, and people in the Middle Ages, by contrast, they thought being was good. They thought the
Right.
world was basically fundamentally good. My doctoral dissertation, by the way, was on the doctrine of the transcendentals in Thomas Aquinas and Meister Eckhart. So, which is basically that being is, if you analyze being, whether you do a resolutio of being, it is also, being is also one. It's also intelligible, therefore true, and it's also desirable, perfective, which is good, right? And so, and so the world is good. It's fundamentally good, which is of course the
Mhm.
opening of Genesis, right? Um, and so, for the people in the Middle Ages, despite all their suffering, well, maybe even because of all their suffering and hardships, they saw the world as fundamentally good, as ordered towards God, and as ordered towards their self, hopefully towards our self. Now, of course, they also had fear of hell, but yeah, ultimately they saw things as ordered toward their salvation, to blessedness and happiness. We have no hope whatsoever. I mean, it's, we've been given we've been we've been given a machine that has promised us prosperity, and the elimination of illnesses and old age, maybe even death of some sort. Peter Thiel, I think, to speak of him again, I think he also has this weird fascination with trying to extend
Yes.
the lifespan and trying to cheat death and so forth and so on, which of course would only turn him
I
into a
don't
rake
Well,
for someone
from Tolkien's
who names every
perspective.
one of his
Um,
companies after Tolkien characters, he does not seem to have read the book. Right.
Yeah, because because for Tolkien, un basically limitless duration is a form of torture. I mean, because it's something that is against our nature as temporal beings. And so it's a nature that can only be redeemed by a higher a higher eternal being, not just simply something that exists in time. Um, but
I think what you've said now
but yeah,
about
so this machine
that we're
promises.
in despair. This is you've just given the best description that I've heard of why we feel so much despair now. I thank you.
Yeah,
Because it's this desperate conviction that we know what's coming. And this is, I mean, the internet,
yeah,
so in the last month or so, I just sort of, after Charlie Kirk's murder, interestingly, I couldn't watch anymore, not because I was feeling despair over his death, which is very sad, but we hope he's in heaven. That suddenly everybody was, the chaos, the cacophony of people claiming that they all knew what was going to happen next was just too
right.
much. It's like, no,
Yeah,
you don't know. You
yeah,
don't know.
yeah, yeah,
This Augustine was right, and of course he's following off of what Jesus said. Stop trying to figure out what's, when the end is coming, everything that's
right,
going to be here, and this desperate desire, which is I think what the AI wants to play, right? It's like
right,
it can predict, it can be the perfect oracle and predict absolutely everything that's coming. So perfect scientific models will all know exactly when, doomsday is going to hit, when the planet blows up, right?
right.
It's like
Do you see this
We
happening more, that people
we
are going to
just don't
be
know.
focusing on doomsday again? I just, there's been this running gag on TikTok and YouTube that the rapture was supposed to happen about 2 weeks ago on a Tuesday, and then it didn't. Of course,
Oh,
all
I
these
saw
funny
something about
videos are
that.
being
Yeah,
made
I don't. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I had.
afterwards.
By the way, I had to tune out after the Charlie Kirk murder. I remember I followed it obsessively. I was doom scrolling. I do that some. I do that.
we all
Um,
do,
and
unfortunately. Yeah.
but I had to do. I had to stop. There was a certain point. It's like I got to stop.
It's exhausting.
I turned off my phone. I put it in another room. I refused to go on X or any other thing, on my computer for a couple of days. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, we think that we can rely on the machine to solve our problems, but the problem is that the machine, is devoid of value. It doesn't recognize what is good or bad. It is, it is just a machine, right? It's not even it is not even programmed to know what is true or false. Um, but whatever, and also, it's, I think there's a sense in which, you know um, now on the one hand, the machine has been very successful in eliminating certain things, right? I mean, certain diseases and so forth and so on. My wife, for example, this a couple few months ago, had a brain infection, where
Mm.
Wow.
where she had to go. Yeah, we had to go through to emergency surgery, at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital, which is an excellent hospital. Thankfully, they had a neurosurgeon team right there, and she had to get antibiotics because it was a brain infection. Um, and 100 years ago, she would have been dead. I mean, this is.
Mm.
That's very
I mean,
scary.
but
People really underestimate that.
so the machine, so this is what makes the machine very convincing. It does eliminate certain evils. It does eliminate certain problems and so forth. But what it does, I think, ultimately, is that it gives us the illusion that it can solve all our problems, to the point where the unsolvable problems, which is basically the fall, mortality,
Mm.
illness, old age, death, as the Buddha encountered them, um, uh, become meaningless. Right? It's something that, if it's not solvable by the machine, therefore it is. There's no meaning in it, and therefore we just despair, because this is something that cannot be solved, by the machine. Um, and I think
But
Tolkien is
that's a
trying to
kind
be.
of Cartesian closed loop on it, or a
Yeah,
Kantian
exactly.
closed loop.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, one of the things that, as my last chapter is the recovery of hope. I think that's like one of the main tasks of Tolkien, is to see that there's something, that there are values that go beyond time. There are certain eternal values. There are certain there's a goodness, to
So
bring
do
back
you think
the medieval notion of the goodness of being, the fundamental goodness of being. Why should we have good hope? Why should we have hope for a happy ending? Which of course is the point of the fairy story, according to Tolkien. Well, it's because being is good. I mean, if you do a philosophical analysis of it, being is good. I mean, evil is an absence of being. It's an absence or privation of good, as Augustine, uh, pointed out, and also Aquinas. This hope is rooted in reality. It's rooted in the goodness of things, which point to an eternal goodness, which uh, and if we make our decisions based on that eternal good, then they will turn out. They will always have a good ending, no, despite maybe a temporary where temporarily might see like a bad decision, but in the end it turns out to be a good one. Just like the pity that Bilbo showed Gollum, and actually there are like a whole bunch of different events in the Lord of the Rings where the characters who had hope made decisions which seemed on the surface to be very foolish
Mm-hmm.
and bad, but actually they turned out to save the whole fellowship. Um, Whereas the bad guys, they make decisions which, even to the reader, seem to be very, very, very practical and very, uh, uh, very expedient, but of course turn out to be disastrous, right? Such as Saruman trying to get the hobbits, for example, or I'm trying to think of some other examples, or Sauron, Sauron just assuming that the Morgul Pass would be unwatched, or that Shelob would get whoever came across the Morgul Pass and so forth.
This is what you pass through things that are so profound and go on to the next things so quickly, right? But the
Yeah.
hope for a happy ending is grounded in a true and deep understanding of reality.
Yeah,
Right. I love that. I love that so much. The happy ending
yeah,
is because it's you've recovered reality.
yeah.
You've
The happy ending is true
the happy
for
ending
Tolkien.
is
It is
true.
true.
It's just
It is true.
this
And
this is
Sam
so
himself
beautifully
says
philosophically grounded.
at the end, he says, "Will everything bad become untrue?" This is what's, of course, speaking of Sam saying the most
Right.
profound things. He says, "Will everything bad become untrue?" And that, I think, Tolkien, he says, "Yes." I mean, everything bad will become untrue, which is kind of an interesting way to phrase it, because in a way, the bad things were real to a certain degree, but once they're seen into perspective of eternity, they become
You see they're
no
not
longer
true.
bad. They become
Yeah.
that the badness becomes no longer true about them. You might say even the badness you now see contributed to your ultimate happiness and salvation. Um, and if it weren't for that bad thing, then you wouldn't have the unimaginable happiness that you have now. Actually, I think Tolkien, as I think I mentioned, Tolkien sees actually sadness and tragedy as an essential part of happiness, because he even talks about the with the happy ending poignant as grief,
Mm-hmm.
or a
Yes.
joy poignant
Mm.
Yes.
as grief. And he mentions even a couple other places where he says, there it was like joy mingled with grief. He says those two go together. And of course, obviously, for him as a Catholic, the cross is an example of that.
Mm-hmm.
Of this great grief that also turns to great joy, and you cannot have the one without the other. Um, and and
And I think
so
with the reality too, you're talking about the machine, that the error of the machine is to be not only disembodied, which we've been mentioning, right? Consciousness independent of body, but it- it has no place, right? And I think
yeah,
what you and I were both responding to. I mean, so when you're talking back about when you were reading the book when you were 12 and it was numinous, um,
yes,
my response when I read it was I loved the place where we lived happened to be, it was in Kentucky, and we had a subdivision that had sort of paths behind the houses that were sort of in woods. I don't know.
uh-huh.
Mm.
They were there were maybe things going on in those woods that I probably would have been horrified to find out was going on in those woods. But anyway, I
Probably is
loved
still back there.
I loved walking barefoot, in on this path to go to the swimming pool through the woods, and imagining that I
uh-huh.
was in part of that story. And
Yeah,
the huge error, the catalog of errors that the AI machine world is making. We've talked about the communication and the faux fellowship and things like that, but the disembodied, disconnected from the reality of our presence in creation. Or we say nature, and then the global warming
sure.
global save the planet by killing every people has kind of missed the point.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I
How
don't
we
think
actually live here, and the goodness, the reality, which is what your chapter on the recovery of nature is, you know, that we're in this in light, in the land, in the place, that
right.
it's a groundedness in the sacredness needs to be have a place.
Right, exactly. And you know, it's funny, you mentioned I had exactly the same reaction after reading Tolkien at 12,
You got
13
to
years
wander
old.
around barefoot
Or
everywhere.
wander around the forest. You go into the forest, and to this day, I still do that. Actually, weekly I leave, I go outside Philadelphia, and I go back to where I grew up,
Mm.
and because there's some beautiful forests there. And I walk around, you know, there. I don't know if you've been to Swarthmore College. I grew up. It's a
I know what it is because we had an
yeah, yeah,
exchange program when I was an
yeah,
undergraduate, and one of my
yeah.
friends
I
did it. So she
yeah.
came back. She came back with all this feminist literature.
Right, right. It's a very yeah. It's a Quaker college. Need I say more? But it's a beautiful campus, and
Mm.
they have woods and a creek and some wonderful trails. And I grew up near there, and I used to go there, and I just you know I thought I was a hobbit going through the old forest and so forth and so on. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's this groundedness in Tolkien, and where the you know the landscape literally comes alive. I mean, it is you know it is a character in its own right, um, and it's also dangerous. This is what I love about
Yes.
Tolkien too. It is dangerous. This is why I think he would have no sympathy with modern ecological activism or anything like that. As much as he loved trees, I don't think he would have any. He would not be. He would not be comfortable with it. He would not really recognize his own concerns there because I think he would see. I mean, his portrayal of nature is very unromantic, I think, and very unsentimental. I mean, he sees it as beautiful, of course, but also is very dangerous. And I think that's one of the things that makes his work. That really, actually, maybe it was one of the things that impressed me the most when I first read it as a 12-year-old was how dangerous, you know, the world was. Especially, of course, as he moves from the, you know, as you move from the Shire, and other scholars have noted this. You know, this,
Hmm.
you know, you go from the Shire, which is relatively safe and cozy and familiar and so forth, and then when you leave, go into the old forest. You're going into you're going into another realm, not just geographically, but also spiritually and metaphysically. I think.
Well, this being, of
And
course,
then
the
the
thing
Barrow
that
Downs, and
Peter Jackson completely missed the point on. Right?
yeah, I
It's
know,
like,
I
but
know.
you don't go into the old forest and have Tom Bombadil sing yourself
I know.
into the story.
Yeah.
You don't get it, right?
Right,
You don't go
exactly. Yeah.
straight from Crick Hollow to Bree. For goodness sake, there's
I
no.
know. And you know,
So
Tolkien
and
himself said Tom is like an essential character. That's why he left him in, even though he doesn't do anything in the plot, right?
well, that he's essential to the enchantment. And
Exactly.
so
That's
he's
the thing.
essential
Yeah.
to the introduction, the sort of entry into that story.
Yeah.
Um,
Into this strange and perilous and uh, you know bizarre world. Yeah, that the hobbits go into.
we've got the chat has been talking, and I have SMP. Yes, I do read the chat if you have a question. John de Brissy is here. Sanjuro River Run, and we had also. Okay, so we take these are not actually questions. A lot of them are reactions, and so I'm looking at them the reactions. So Sanjuro the black crack down to Goblin Town, down to Goblin Town. You go, my lad, ho, my lad. I think that's from
From the Hobbit. Yeah, that's
that's
from the Hobbit.
from the movies, right?
Yeah, yeah.
John Abrisi is being Australian and provocative. What do Trump and Tolkien have in common? We're not answering that right now, unless you
Last
feel
names
like it.
begin with P.
Yes. Oh, this is John again. I read that there's only ever been one genuine philosophical novel, that is philosophy written in novel form, Sartre's Nausea.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm not
It's
a big
do you
fan
agree?
of
Well, yeah, no.
I'm not a big
It's
fan
not Nausea is
of
not even really a novel. I mean, I read it
yeah.
in college in the postmodernism class, and I just,
Yeah, I read it a
did
long
not know
time
what I was
ago.
getting in for, right? So Sanjuro is saying, so hell is a flat, temporal, endless spinning.
And yeah, well, it's I mean it's not just Tolkien. I mean Aquinas talks about this, and um in question 10, first part, prima pars, question 10 of the Summa Theologiae, he talks about, you know, the distinction between time and eternity. And he says, you know, time and eternity are two different things. I mean, it's not, you know, eternity is not just endless time.
Mm.
That is a mistake. And he even says, hell is endless time. I mean, that is, hell is existing in, you know, a state of just simply one time after another. Eternity is something that, of course, obviously, it's so different from our normal experiences that it's hard to describe. But you know, he says eternity is something that's essentially different
Mm.
than time. And one of the ways I think to think about it is through Tolkien, actually, particularly, you know, when in the story Leaf by Nigel, with which I begin the book, because that's how I begin my course too. Because Leaf by Nigel is like this really bizarre story that is very different from anything else he wrote. Um, but you know, he talks about how Nigel is kind of, you know, goes, well, basically he dies, right? He has to leave, right? He has to go on this needful journey, and he goes to a place like this, was it rest home,
The
hospital, where he
workhouse.
has
He
to
has to go to the
recuperate, which is kind of
workhouse.
like the workhouse. Has to go to the workhouse, which is, yeah, and Tolkien is very explicit. This is kind of an allegory for purgatory. um, and one of the most important aspects of that stay in the workhouse is how Nigel's relation to time
Mm-hmm.
is transformed. um, he no longer grabs onto time. This is a very Eckartian notion, right? As he kind of lets go of time. So he's not like existing in some sort of static, frozen moment like of the now, which is the only way we could think of as eternity, as something static and unmoving. Um, but actually as a state in which he completely lets go of time. He says, I think he what's the phrase that Tolkien uses? He no longer uh, he let oh shoot he no longer paid attention to time, and therefore he was a master
Mm-hmm.
of his time. Unfortunately, I don't have the quote directly, but
Well, he's also
unless
saying that
I do
Nigel,
have tree and leaf over here, but
but Nigel,
um,
when he's alive, when he's niggling because he's niggling at the painting of the tree and never actually finishing it.
yeah,
And that in the
and he's
workhouse,
always
and he's
pressed
always
for
pressed for
time
time. In the
too.
workhouse, he learns. And now I was it you who said this, or maybe I was reading somebody else. Oh, I have you read the uh no, I've forgotten his name. I can't remember names always right now. This is very bad. The book is The High Hallow, The Liturgical Imagination.
Oh yeah, I
That's
know I
it's
have not read
lovely.
that.
I
I think
read
it
yours
came
and
out.
his together this summer.
I think it came out just after, or maybe just, or not in time for me to read it, or and to
Right,
reference
and I
it.
should remember his name, Ben. Drat. Oh darn it. Gotta look it up. Anyway, Nigel, he needs to learn how to spend his time properly. The High Hallow is actually about how the liturgical
Sorry,
element of Tolkien, and
I'm just getting
you're gonna
Leaf
look
by
at it.
Nigel.
We're gonna both look stuff up. Just a second, because
Yeah.
I wanna tell people about High Hallow, and I've blanked on.
Um,
We got two call it Professor Ben Reinhard. Ben Reinhard. Tolkien's liturgical imagination. um and that he has the liturgy is a different is the time is what we can experience of time of eternity in our life, right, because of
right,
the way
right,
it recurs. And that
right,
the time that Nigel spends in the workhouse, or the the duration or whatever it is in the workhouse, is learning to be in the liturgical time.
right. That's very fascinating. Yeah. And, yeah, actually, I have the passage here. He says he did not like the treatment at all. The medicine they gave him was bitter. The officials and attendants were unfriendly, silent, and strict, and he never saw anyone else except a very severe doctor who visited him occasionally. It was more like being in a prison than a hospital. He had to work hard at stated hours, at digging, carpentry, and painting bare boards, all one plain color. He was never allowed outside, and the windows all looked inwards. They kept him in the dark for hours at a stretch to do some thinking, they said. He lost count of time.
Mm.
He did not even begin to feel better. Um, but then he says, um, Oh yeah, he got. But later he got through quite a lot in a day. Now he finished small things off neatly. He had no time of his own. This is where, except alone in his bed cell, and yet he was becoming master of his time. He began to know just what he could do with it. There was no sense of rush. He was quieter inside now, and at resting time, he could really rest. And you have echoes of this, I think, in like when they stay in, when the fellowship stays in Lorien and Rivendell, there's always constant. m- Tolkien is always constant referring to how, time doesn't seem to pass, or it passes. It passes either very fast or very slowly, or
Hmm.
both at the same time. And so whenever they enter these elven realms, they have a completely new relation to time, which may not be eternity, but certainly approaches eternity. Because Aquinas also talks about a mode of time in between eternity and time called eternity,
Mm.
which may be the temporality of the angels and so forth. Um, and so I think Tolkien was really fascinated by these questions, and he wanted to explore them in his legendarium. I know. I think Verlyn Flieger, she wrote a book, A Question of Time, I think it was, in which she details how Tolkien was actually fascinated by notions of time, time travel, um, notions of ancestral memory, and so forth and so on. Um, but I also think, even more importantly, he was really fascinated by what eternity would be like. I mean, what would it be like to live in eternity? Where you had where you had all the time in the world, so to speak, um, um, and yet we're never bored, right? We're but we're constantly fulfilled.
Well, I
Um,
think I think it has to be
and
liturgical because he talks so much about the being in the mass and the masses
Yeah,
there.
yeah. That's actually on my that's on my
The
reading
Ben
list.
Reinhardt's
The
book.
Tolkien's.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
lovely.
The
But I read yours
Tolkien's
together with
bookings
his,
are all
and
that.
so they've turned into this one concept of beauty. So anyway,
Yeah.
we have a long question here, which I'm not sure. It's like, I think this is not is this more to me than you, but let's. Um, the thing that
Uh huh.
concerns me is that there is a way in which the critique of the machine leads into anti-modern notions that don't quite escape the pitfalls of modernity, that is still caught up in its affirmations and negations. I think of folks like Kingsnorth, I mean Paul Kingsnorth, who I just heard
Hmm.
talk at the Touchstone conference.
Right.
These
Right.
folks end up harboring prejudicial attitudes towards reason, philosophy, theology, and language that are actually very similar to the modernists they detest so much. Okay, this is bringing people in off stage that aren't here. We did that with Peter Thiel, but we had a particular thing about the Palantir.
Right.
So
Right.
I
Right.
wonder if Dr. Brown has a sense of that and how we might carve out a positive vision that doesn't fall prey to the Eastern Orthodox Protestant anti-modernism. Well, how would you answer that? We're Catholics. We're all Catholics here. How do we Catholics
Well.
answer the
Yeah.
Protestant
Yeah.
modernist? Which the thing is, and I think this is where the realism and nominalism might be helpful to
Right. Yeah.
consider because I said the thing that I'm weakest at in my own ability to think about Tolkien is his insight into language
Uh huh.
and
Right.
the specific philosophical part of his linguistic understanding was in the understanding that you pointed to in the medieval debate between about names, right? It's like
Right. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Tolkien is, of course, it's like, one, he's obsessed with naming things, but names
Yeah.
have, the same the
Names
same
have.
the same
n-
mountain has got a lot of different names in Dwarvish and Elvish
Right.
and things
Right.
like that.
Right.
But there's the explain it to everybody, please, Dr. Philosophy, right? You have an actual PhD, right? Mine's a fake one. It's in history. Um, that there's the realism versus nominalism because the nominalism, thanks to Occam, is often used to talk about that's how we ended up in modernity with the problems that we have, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
how do
Right.
we deal with this? This is
Okay.
easy, right?
Well. Well. Okay. Well,
Eckhart
there's
talks
really
about
easy.
this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Right, there's certain yeah, well, actually, Eckhart was a
There
hyper
you go.
realist philosophically. He was the opposite of Occam in many ways.
Let
Although they were
Occam. Well,
exact contemporaries.
see,
So,
Eckhart got accused
yeah,
of heresy, and Occam, had to run away and live in the empire.
yeah,
One way or the other, they both got,
yeah, yeah. I know. Yeah, there's a quote by Eckhart apparently he said why of course he got into trouble because of his pro imperial
So
inclinations.
did Occam, right?
And
They
he says,
both
why,
get into
it's like
trouble for
there's this,
that.
yeah. Well, Occam's like, why didn't you go after this crazy German who's saying all these outrageous things, Um, but okay, well, there are a couple of things like, how do you how do you not slip into like maybe a reactionary anti-modernism? I guess is
Right.
maybe one question. Then there's there's the nominalism realism question. I guess the first question, I don't know. I guess I mean, maybe this is oversimplistic, but as you said, like I think for Protestants, so I heard somewhere where Protestantism is a version of Christianity that is either or, whereas Catholicism is a version of Christianity that is
Hmm.
both and, right? Or in a way, I mean, so you have like a Protestant thinker like Kierkegaard. It's like he has a book called Either
He
or, right?
literally has
You
a
have
book
to
called
either
Either Or.
decide. Yeah, literally. I mean, it's literally either or. You have to go beyond. You go beyond reason by rejecting reason. You have the teleological suspension of the ethical. The story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac is an example of something that outrages reason and so forth. Whereas the Catholic tradition does, sees going beyond reason as actually the fulfillment of reason. It's not something that negates it or goes against it, or as Aquinas says, it's grace building upon nature, not negating it. And in many ways, I think they're, and and someone who's really good about this is Holly Ordway. She talks about Tolkien's modern
Mm.
reading and Tolkien's faith, and she points out that I mean, one of the things she emphasizes, and was kind of an eye opener to me, was that the caricature of Tolkien, particularly that Humphrey Carpenter kind of portrayed in his biography, was that of like this just really sort of
Hmm.
reactionary fuddy duddy.
And
Um,
it's because
but that was
whoever
not
did
Tolkien.
that series of photographs of him, this more like he's sitting in a
Mhm.
tree, and it's on all the books, right? It was when he
Right.
was fairly old,
Yeah.
so you just have this image of he
Right.
was perpetually old, rather
Right. Yeah.
rather than he was,
Exactly.
and
Right.
he
Right.
was, in his 40s and 50s when he was writing The Lord of the
Right.
Rings. Yeah.
Right. Well, and she and of course some of it is maybe superficial, but he had no qualms about adopting various aspects of modern technology. He used ballpoint pens when his friend C.S. Lewis insisted on still using his fountain pen and so forth. I mean, those, but even more deeply, he was someone who was well read, in the news. You know, Actually, like for example, one of the problems is that a lot of people conflate
Right.
Lewis with Tolkien. Lewis was adamant about not reading the newspapers and not knowing what was going on in the world, and they just sort of transfer that to Tolkien. But actually, according to Ordway's research, Tolkien was very much up on the latest news. He actually subscribed to like 3 different newspapers. He used typewriters, whereas again Lewis would eschew any sort of machine like that. Tolkien was for using like dictographs, use and microphones and tape recorders. I mean, so this notion of Tolkien as this like utter luddite and anti-modernist is a caricature.
Well, it's a
But
misunderstanding
also I
of
think
his
it
critique of
transfers.
the machine. Yeah.
Right. I mean, and also it extends to his fiction and his deeper thinking, I think, too. I mean, um, he was very deeply involved in the events of the 20th century and was very much addressing modern themes. This is why people love the Lord of the Rings and his other work so much, is that he directly addresses contemporary um, uh, themes of modern of technology and um, the dangers of technology, but not necessarily the rejection of it. Uh, so um,
Go back to
so
realism and
yeah, I mean, I
nominalism.
don't. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer to
Well,
that
no, but
question, but
the nominal, this is, people get tripped up on this a lot, and I think that the sort of the nominalism destroyed, everything good, is a
yeah,
default philosophical claim in the. I mean, like Brad Gregory uses it some in the Unintended Reformation,
yeah.
right? It's like
I mean,
you end
I
up with
think
the
there's some.
fragmenting and the fracturing and the you can, I mean, for example, the neo-Gnosticism of the pronouns and the gender,
Right.
great gender
Exactly.
debates, right?
Yeah.
Can it be
Yeah. I
whatever,
mean,
what's the relationship between the names that we use for things and what they really are? And
the
is there a
Humpty.
reality for them to be associated with in terms of the names that we use?
Right. The modern was it the modern philosophy of language is that of Humpty Dumpty, Lewis Carroll's Humpty
Yes,
Dumpty. I
right,
I
exactly.
name whatever I a word means whatever I mean it to mean.
And that's Lewis Carroll
I'm
making
trying.
fun of
That's
this
Lewis.
problem,
Right.
right?
Exactly. Right. Um, so yeah, and I think there's some truth to. I mean, I'm suspicious of unicausal explanation. So I won't say that all of our problems go back to nominalism, but there is some truth to
Oh, come
nominalism
on, use
being
Occam's razor on it.
being a philosophical problem. I mean, well, the whole
Don't
thing is that
multiply. Don't what is it? What's Occam's razor actually? Don't multiply appearance. No, don't
entities should not be multiplied
entities.
beyond
Right
necessities. Yeah,
there you go.
yeah. And but beyond necessity, right? I mean, sometimes certain entities are necessary to posit, right? Um, and
But
for
does
Tolkien,
did Occam see this thing? I'm wondering because one, I know that philosophers are thin on the ground in Tolkien studies and in medieval studies right now. Because sometimes I try to every so often, I'm going to be teaching Abelard on Monday, and I'll be back in the
Mhm,
problem of, oh yes, he had
right?
this big debate with
Problem
Rosalind
of universals. Yeah, yeah,
over the Trinity because of universals, and it's
right.
impossible to explain.
Yeah,
I don't
well, yeah,
understand why it's so hard to
ex-
explain because, but some
it
of it's
is. Well,
because
it's
it's like looking at your tongue while you're talking kind of thing. It's like,
exactly because
when
it's
does
so
the name
fundamental.
mean the
It's so
reality?
it's so close to your, like it's hard to look at your hand when it's so close to your eyes.
Right.
Um, and this, of course, is such a fundamental problem, therefore so hard to really deal with and understand. I mean,
You're
the
going to
question
really
is, what?
disappoint me if you can't explain it because
Well,
you're my
well,
last
Tolkien.
hope.
I mean, it goes back to Tolkien. Of course, is a great way to get into this, right? Because Tolkien was a do words mean something, right? I
Exactly.
mean, do words mean something, or are they just simply the product of social convention, right? Um, and there is a certain sense in which, yeah, words are to a certain degree a product of social convention. Obviously, the language you speak is going to determine which vocal sounds you're going to use to describe a dog, for example, a chien in French, hund in German, dog in English, and so forth. So yeah, there's a convention there. But Tolkien was convinced that the power of language, you couldn't explain the power of language, particularly the power of myth and of poetic language. Um, you could you that the power of poetry and myth is impossible to explain on a purely on a explanation of language which says that language is purely convention, right? That the meanings of words are purely conventional. um, Tolkien
Ooh, I like that.
was
Yes.
absolutely convinced that the power of poetry, the power of language, because language has the power over us, it does have a quasi magical power over us. It doesn't necessarily have to open the doors of Moria, but it does have a power to move us. It has a power to uh, to to um, uh, give certain insights and so forth and so on. And that's not just that cannot be just convention. There has to be something there has to be something in the things that language evokes. Um, that is not just something that we place there. There's a meaning in those things that are not just placed there by human beings, but are latent or potentially in the things themselves. And that any skillful use of language, it'll be something that brings those latent or potential meanings out of things. Um,
That's
and
great.
so,
That's really, I love that.
yeah, and so,
I mean,
and
that's somewhat what Barfield says, right, in the
this
poetic
is, and he
diction.
owes a lot of this to Barfield.
Yeah.
And of course, I do a big analysis of Barfield's poetic diction, which Tolkien read and was really influenced by, because and Barfield uses the example of um, spirit, right? Spiritus, right? Which actually in Latin just simply means breath, right? But at the primal level, you might say, of language, it meant both breath and what we would call spirit or mind, right? The
Right.
two were not the two were not separated. They were actually there in the phenomenon itself. And only later, as human beings, as societies developed and as philosophical and scientific thought developed, were those metaphorical meanings separated out from the literal meanings. So now you have, on the one hand, air, which is a purely physical thing, or breath, which is a purely physical or biological or physiological process, and then you have spirit or mind, which is and of course, which is separate from it. And of course, this,
Mm-hmm.
with Descartes and Bacon, this becomes formalized, so to speak, in our philosophical and scientific thinking. Um, but Barfield argued, and Tolkien was, I agreed 100% with Barfield, that actually the reason why ancient and it's not just language, not just language in general, but ancient languages in particular, uh, hold meanings that are objectively, you might say, in the words themselves. They're just not conventional, but they are actually in those things. And because and what's so important um, for Tolkien, and and throughout his fiction, he talks about, you know, um, something important or something crucial to the success of the Fellowship lies in being able to decipher an ancient
Right.
language, right? Because these ancient languages are closer to the union of metaphor and a metaphorical and literal meaning, um, than modern languages. Modern languages are, in a sense, debased from ancient languages, in the sense that we now separate the literal and metaphorical meanings so much that we cannot see their connection, which is why poetry is dead. I mean, for example, poetry is a dead art,
We are
for the
desperately
most
trying to
part.
revive
I was
it.
I was thinking the
Oh, I
exact
know, I know.
opposite. I was thinking that's why it's so
But
important.
that's why it's so important, and that's why it's so important to recover it, right? Um, but in ancient societies, poetry was the way in which people thought. I mean, and I'm not saying everyone spoke in poetry, but certainly they memorized large chunks of poetry. They thought in terms of poetry, of whether it's Homer or Beowulf, or one of the chansons de geste, the troubadours and so forth. And so this is Tolkien's realism. He thinks that there is the metaphorical poetic meanings are not just something that's a result of convention, something that we put into things, but are actually in the things themselves, and that the poet finds the proper words to draw them out, to draw out that latent meaning. Um, and that modern society, being the
Right.
machine, being
Right. Yes, yes,
AI,
yes.
right? Where we have AI, the literal and the metaphorical are completely separated. And of course, this is a long result of nominalism, right? The nominalists argued that, well, words are, well, purely conventional, right? They're just something we come up with uh, as a utilitarian way to deal with the various objects in our experience, and we just give them names. It doesn't matter what those names are.
Well, not the good
The
ones.
only important thing is that everyone agrees on what the names are, and that we can use them and manipulate them. And therefore, what is knowledge? Knowledge becomes the manipulation of symbols, becomes the manipulation of language, of pronouns, as you mentioned earlier, and it has absolutely no connection to reality.
And you've just described the
um,
LLMs, right? The way those robots just recombine stuff, and it doesn't mean anything to them. They don't
yeah,
have breath,
yeah,
so
yeah,
they don't actually
right,
have
yeah.
have
AI is, yeah,
the
yeah, it's
reality that those symbols that they're manipulating or pointing to.
yeah, it's not intelligent, it's
Right.
not conscious.
But
It's
you've
just simply
beautifully
following an
captured how
algorithm.
it's the realist novelist debate is key to understanding why these LLMs induce such despair.
Right.
Bingo.
Exactly. Yeah. And and of course, in the Middle Ages, you still had this sense of the tight connection between words and things, which I think Tolkien wanted
He
to
did. This is
recover, right?
if
In
I
his
take
in his work,
courage
and
from
he
your
did.
book, it's like I have to write my book on poetry and Tolkien. Especially now
Yeah,
that they
I mean,
came out with the
and
edition of it that I still haven't had time to read because I've been working on Franciscans. But anyway.
and look at Tolkien's names, the names that I mean, they've now become as familiar as our own real primary world geography, and because the names really evoke powerful,
Right.
evoke meanings. They evoke powerful meanings, which, and actually, and one of the thing, and Tolkien even was so far convinced that, he insisted on leaving his elven
Hmm.
poetry untranslated because he thought that just hearing those words could convey the meaning. He thought that you literally did not have to understand, so to speak, at least on a rational level, what the poems were, but you could understand on a deeper level just by the sounds of the words and the way the words connected us to connect the reader or the listener to the things
Sounds
themselves.
like
Um,
the way some people describe the Latin Mass. If you do
Mm.
not understand Latin, you still understand what's
Yeah, and this is, actually, it's funny you bring that up because I was thinking of that actually. One of the things towards the end of his life, of course, Tolkien was very upset that they put the mass into the vernacular. And again, Ordway talks about how, again, Tolkien was certainly open to certain, not only theological but also some liturgical reforms. He was not, again, he was not the stick in the mud fuddy-duddy, but he did think something was really crucially lost in getting rid
Hmm.
of the Latin. He would have been open to some vernacular parts of the mass, but getting rid of the Latin entirely was something he thought was tragic. And it wasn't because just some dyed in the wool conservatism. It was because the Latin was a ancient
right.
language, and therefore it had a closer relationship to the meanings of things
Right.
than a modern, bureaucratic, technical, um, English, which is of course what the mass was translated into in the late '60s. This sort of bureaucratic, corporate, horrible English, which is so flat and banal that
And isn't that a
yeah,
pity because English is a
superficially
beautiful
full,
language too?
which is a pity, right? I mean, there are actually, I mean, I think like the old, what is it? The Anglo Catholics have a translation of the Mass, which is basically the Tridentine Mass, but in 16th century English,
Mm.
and it's quite beautiful, right? I mean, so that's possible, but they didn't do that. That's one of the strange things in the late '60s. They could have done that. They could have just, translated the Tridentine Mass into this
They
beautiful
managed to
16th
kill
century English.
liturgical Latin and English at the same time.
Exactly, exactly, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's horrible. I mean, I mean, I mean, I confess, I mean, I I and my children go to our local Latin. I go to the Latin Mass on a regular basis. Uh, I've been doing so now for, well, I guess for 4 years now. So, um, and yeah, I mean, I think and it has a powerful effect on my children too. Even being jaded teenagers,
Mhm.
there, yeah, it commands a respect that the vernacular
It's very
doesn't.
calming to the soul too,
Um,
I've noticed, in
yeah,
children.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I think, Tolkien was. I think, I don't know if he explicitly, talks about this, but I think, but the implication is that he thought that, the vernacular, putting the mass into vernacular was a
Mm.
tragic mistake. Um, just due to his views on
Well, I
language.
I love the way you've
And he was a great.
described it. It's saying that the ancient has this access to reality, and that makes it
Yeah,
important. You've said it better than I've been able to say it, and I'm thankful for that, um, because I really get the feel of the realism, why the nominalism is has been so corrosive for us,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. Ancient languages. One of the things that's wonderful about them, well, at least just the ones I know, which are Latin and Greek.
right,
They're
the
very concrete,
concreteness of the
which
yes,
is
but this is
they don't deal
I
in abstract. Like a republic is, Latin is res publica. It is the public
right.
thing. right? It is the public matter, right? Whereas, of course, we have this airy notion of
It all
republic
becomes very
and
abstract
representative
and
democracy, blah
yeah.
blah. Becomes very abstract. Whereas for the Romans, it was the public matter,
Hmm.
right? That's what the republic was, and so. And you deal with it, and all these even like very philosophical uh, things like spirit, spiritus, right, is also breath, right? And so it has this connection between the what we would call the spiritual, right, or the immaterial and the material. But um, for the for the native Latin speaker, they would have seen this as a unity with maybe two different aspects, but certainly as something that. So maybe that's why they didn't. The mind body problem was not really a problem for them, right? Because for them, words had both a spiritual and a material aspect. So why couldn't the being who uses language have both a spiritual or immaterial and material aspect, uh, whose unity was not in doubt? And it's only when you get this very nominalist, conventional view of language and
Right.
abstraction that the mind body problem becomes a problem. Right? Um,
That
yeah.
explains it for me. I'm really happy. No, thank you. I'm glad I pressed you on that because I feel much clearer about the stakes, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
it's yeah. So the recovery, which I think we've worked back through the that you open the book with this problem of fantasy as basically his method of recovery, and when you're talking
Yeah.
about Leaf by Noggle, that sets it up. But I love this when you saying that um the talking about the secondary the secondary world and the primary world and the truth, and that the secondary
Mhm.
fighting fantasy is about creating the secondary world with the sense of reality, right?
Right, right.
But
Yeah, this
this this is your words, right? But the secondary world of fantasy is the truth of the primary world, which I
yeah,
love. That's like it's the Chestertonian thing you're seeing through the other side, right? It's like you turn this
right, right,
lens so that now
right,
you can see clearly again, and
right, right.
that is it's like philosophically this is a beautiful uh description of what Tolkien is up to, right?
Yeah.
He needs, we need the frame, we need the lens so that we see clearly again, and that he has done that for us, and you've helped us see that. That's really great.
Yeah, well, for Tolkien, he uses that Chesterton thing about we live in a world where somehow we think that what he calls the motor car is more
Yes.
real than a tree, and he thinks that's utterly perverse, right? I mean, it's a dead machine, right? And we live in a world that is a dead machine, and that blinds us to the living world that that machine is based on, but separates us from at the same time. And so yeah, so to see the world as living, as meaningful, I think that's what makes Tolkien. So I think that's what makes him the author of the 20th century, according to those polls at the end of the 20th century, why people are so attracted to his work, because he gives us the truth of the primary world.
Amen.
Yeah.
That's a great place to end. But we don't want to end because do the great
Uh,
tales never end? No, we have to.
I
It's
know.
like
Actually, I'm just looking at. I'm for the first time in 2 hours. I'm looking at my watch. I can't even believe that uh, the time flew by that quickly. It was such a fun discussion.
well, we our chat is agreeing that Sanjuro is
Yeah.
saying I have to go, but wow, this discussion was absolutely amazing. You all helped along with the spirit to make some great connections for me. Praise be to God. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. That's
Nice.
great. Thank you. Thank you.
The live responses are happy right now. So
Right. That's great. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I thank everyone. And also, if you liked it, buy my book.
yes, yes,
and
you
if
got
you
to hear, yeah, I just show it, right? It's like
and if you like the book, leave a review on Amazon. It helps the algorithm. Unfortunately, the machine, uh, we can't escape it
we both,
entirely.
yes, we both, wrestle with and whatever the machine. Anyway, that was wonderful, and you've answered my I dragged you on here to explain nominalism and realism, and now I'm happy.
Awesome, awesome. Well,
Thank
we
you.
need more realism.
We need more realism, and you guys, you've got to read his book. This is just a taste of the wisdom that you Robert, you've given us to our reading of Tolkien. So I'm so glad that as a philosopher you jumped in, because we've had a lot of other perspectives on Tolkien, but not yet philosophy. And
Right.
you've
I'm,
made
I'm
it
glad.
you've made it
I'm
clear that
glad to
was
represent
necessary.
glad to represent the philosophers.
Representing the philosophers.
Okay.
Okay, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Casey. It was great talking to both of you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.